brought in and deported waves of migrants. That's our history, and that continues today. During World War I, a fellow by the name of Herbert Hoover, who was working in agriculture, essentially functioning as a lobbyist for the agricultural industry, recognized the need, or had been lobbied by farmers, the need for cheap laborers. And he went to Congress and helped change, or the Department of Labor, and helped change the rules. And lo and behold, farmers got what they needed, a relaxation of the rules, and migrant workers were let in, mostly from Mexico. And, but fast forward, shall I pause? Okay. To the Depression, when Herbert Hoover is president, and there's a whole different atmosphere in the United States. We don't want these migrants anymore. We got too many migrants. So what did Herbert Hoover do? He rounded up migrants, one of the greatest periods of deportations ever. Railway stations were teeming with both migrants and many of them Americans who were caught up, as they are being caught up today, in immigration rounds, as immigration agents went and jailed migrants and deported them back to Mexico, or to Mexico in the case of those Americans who have been caught up in the immigration sweeps. The same thing happened after the Bracero period, which I had mentioned before, period in which migrants were legally led into the country under an agreement signed by Mexico and the United States. But in the 50s, when the economy went bad, they were called wetbacks, were not seen as useful to the economy, and again, a period of deportations started, led by then President Eisenhower, with Operation Wetback. That rounded up the same people who had been so needed before. So you can see the kind of the boom and bust cycles that follow, that immigration patterns and immigration enforcement patterns follow. And certainly we're seeing exactly the same thing during the Obama administration. President Obama has deported more migrants than ever before. In the last couple of years, he's deported 800,000 people, which is set a record, and it's phenomenal. And we can talk, if you like, about the reasons for that later. But I guess the takeaway, the issue, is that migration is not just a matter of law. What are the policies that influence migration? Why do people come? And I've asked that question earlier on. And I've seen it for myself in talking to migrants and visiting countries where that have actually been sending migrants abroad to get a sort of first-hand impression of what was going on and why. When I was in Senegal, which is on the west coast of Africa, if you look at the map of Africa, like that, bulge is right there, that's Senegal. I visited and met with people who had made a living by working on farms or working on the sea, fishing. And they saw their industries really coming to an end or being economically depressed. Why? Well, for one thing, the fishing had been, and the fish stock had been depleted, largely as a result, yes, of some Senegalese, but mostly as a result of industrial-sized trawlers that were basically in the area taking so many fish out of the ocean that the Senegalese could not make a living as they had for generations fishing. Why couldn't they work the farms as they had before? Well, I saw that when I went to the port and saw massive boats unloading food from Latin America, from Europe, food that had been subsidized by governments as a favor to farmers in those countries that was cheaper in Senegal to sell and to market than it was for those farmers to grow. When I spoke to workers, farm workers in California, and asked them where they came from, many of those farmers talked about the fact that they had been corn farmers in places like Michoacan, in Oaxaca, in Mexico, these estates in Mexico, but had not been able to compete with corn that had been subsidized by the U.S. government for farm and grown in the Midwest and then shipped to Mexico. So what I'm suggesting is that these kinds of policies have a direct bearing on migration. People don't just all of a sudden wake up and say, I think I'm going to migrate. What are the reasons that people migrate? I follow a company called Hanes Brands. Most of you are familiar with the company, I'm sure, that makes underwear. And this is a sort of a peripatetic company that go all over the world, and opening up and closing down. It's a race to the bottom to see where they can find the cheapest places that they can for their labor. But as they open factories and close factories, that also causes migration patterns. In fact, at a Hanes, a place in Monterrey, in Mexico, where Hanes workers had been working, they closed down a couple of factories, laid off a couple of hundred people. And the women there who I spoke to, it's mostly women assembly workers, told me that as a result of Hanes Brands leaving Mexico, one of the things they had done was give severance pay to many of the workers. And because there were no jobs in the area where they were working, a lot of the men took the severance pay, hired human smugglers, coyotes, and bought themselves a trip into the United States. So, again, you have a direct relationship between the activities of a multinational company and migration. So there are causes, there are consequences. As Janet Napolitano said when she was governor of Mexico, and she may have been Attorney General at the time she said it, show me a 50-foot fence, I'll show you a 51-foot ladder. People are going to migrate if the opportunity is there. So around the world, as I said before, we've got many countries that, it's a similar issue. Many countries have a culture of migration, as Mexico does, as the Philippines does. That in the Philippines, you're expected to sort of grow up and go abroad, make money, and send it home. The Philippines grows people for export. They send about 1 million people abroad every single year. They have festivals where they reward migrants. It's expected. Many of us who have been in a hospital have been served and seen Filipino nurses and people working around the hospital. Many of them who trained as nurses in the Philippines. There's an actual shortage of nurses in the Philippines. That's because they train in the Philippines to become nurses, and they train to the standards set by U.S. hospitals and Canadian hospitals and Saudi Arabian hospitals. I was in a Filipino hospital and I asked how many people were planning on staying in the Philippines and working as nurses. I was in Filipino nursing school, I should say. Not one hand went up. All these people were training with the expectation that they would go abroad. So people are going to migrate. I want to come back to the issue I mentioned before about high-tech migration. I haven't really touched too much on that. Ron, I don't know how much you've lectured, how many people know about what's caused that. And, I can go into the history of it. Fascinatingly, a lot of it began in the year 2000 when Y2K was going to become a crisis, where massive amounts of code needed to be rewritten to stop the computer clocks from automatically, from not picking up the date correctly. It was thought the world would come to an end. I don't think it did, but one of the reasons it did was that so much labor was contracted to India and other places, mostly India, for the low-wage work that needed to be done to bring that code up to date, that there too began a culture and a history of migration and interaction between high-tech companies here and abroad. An interaction and a relationship which continues to this day. So Ron recently gave a speech and had a table in a paper looking at the top 10 H-1B employers for the years 2007, 2009 fiscal years, and found out that in 3 years the top 10 companies obtained something like 34,000 visas. These are high-tech workers they would bring in from abroad. 34,000. That's equivalent to twice the number of students attending RIT. Among them, those 10 companies employ 1.6 million people worldwide. Now, it's hard to know exactly how many people are in each country because the companies are not required to state that. But just take one of them, Microsoft, a company you may have heard of. 60%, 60% of Microsoft's employees are in the United States. That means 40% are abroad. Now, when you think about the collaborative nature of high-tech workers, these people talk to each other regularly. You have to. And it seems to me that just as Microsoft shifts bodies around all over the world, and other companies, to jobs where it makes the most sense, where the skills are needed, that what people who are advocating restrictions on migration and into the U.S. may be forgetting or ignoring, or certainly not working on, and it's interesting that this talk is being co-sponsored by the AFL-CIO, is the opportunity for people in these industries to talk to each other, not just about the next project they're going to be working on, but about their employer. And looking back historically on the whole issue of migrants and migrant labor, and the AFL-CIO, one huge opportunity that's been missed, and it continues to be missed in my view, is that they failed to see this transfer of employees across the globe as an opportunity. The fact is that these companies act as if there are no borders, and they are able to do quite well with what essentially is for them a borderless global economy. I think it's an opportunity for incredible cross-border organizing. If you're being screwed by one company and you've got to work in another country working for the same company, those people need to get together and talk. So that's a difficult thing to do, and I realize that.